If you're more open with the business, I think people will respect you more, and I think they're going to believe in what it is you're trying to do.
Ignition sequence start. 3, 2, 1.
Justin, thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, my pleasure.
Dude, I'm pumped to have you here. I don't think anybody's ever interviewed. I went on YouTube, I couldn't find another video.
Yeah, I like to keep a bit of a low profile.
This is great. So do I have an exclusive then?
This is an exclusive. There's
Awesome.
an embargo on it right now.
Yes. So for those that aren't familiar with your background, company, I know you have Hushed, but also AffinityClick.
Yeah, so AffinityClick is the company, and
Yep.
Hushed is a mobile product that we built probably about 7 years ago. It's in the mobile telephony space, so a lot of people would use the term OTT, over the top. So
Over the top.
So this would be a technology that sits on top of the data layer on your cell phone. So effectively, with our platform, you're able to act and feel like a mobile phone.
Oh,
and
got it.
We're actually leveraging the data connection of the carrier and not our solution.
Okay, so you don't have to have your own cell. You don't use the voice component. Who are there other examples of OTT out there that?
So like Google Voice would be a good example.
WhatsApp?
WhatsApp would be an OTT type solution as well, because you've now got you've got a VoIP connection between two peers.
Yep.
And you've got codecs in between in terms of ensuring that the call quality is good. And VoIP's been around for a long time. So what this is essentially is, think of a traditional PBX phone, or you have a PBX
VoIP.
in your office, which is a big system where essentially you would go and buy hardware, and you'd buy lines from Bell or Rogers.
That's how we used to do it.
Yeah,
Some of these young kids today that were born in 2001 have no clue.
Exactly. So, you ultimately, you're kind of getting rid of all of that infrastructure. And the first step was you had fixed line, which was basically, copper wires going into a PBX.
Yeah.
And then kind of 20 years ago, VoIP came, or I don't know when the actual protocol came out, but it's been a long time. And you could go to different companies and get a VoIP hardware phone, which you'd plug into your desk.
Cisco had those.
And they still exist today. In fact, if you go to
most
bank,
companies are
probably VoIP, because it's going to be cheaper and
configurable and all that stuff.
Exactly. You can set up,
change numbers on people.
Fairly easily. But that's like a $40 to $50 a month solution.
Wow.
And it can be expensive if you're a big. I've been talking to a few different types of companies like car dealerships, and they're using, different solutions from Bell, Rogers, or T-Mobile. And those companies essentially are VoIP, but they're still paying $30 to $40 a month. Our solution basically allows you to offer the same call quality, but in a mobile product. So it's bring your own device.
Yep.
You can bring it to work. You can install the app.
Is that still called Hushed?
That's Hushed.
Why is it called Hushed?
It's it's a name that
sounds like
it's I call it a bit of an edgy name, and
it
actually
is edgy.
The brand,
is there a story behind it?
No, not really. I mean,
a certain type of use case that came out of it.
I think so. The bit of the background or history with Hushed.
And for context, are you open with your numbers? Do you share kind of like how many people have signed up for it? I know it's in the millions. I just I don't.
Yeah,
I know the numbers, but I'm not going to throw them out there if you don't.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk a little bit about, the size.
But you've been doing this for a while, incredibly successful.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, successful to some degree.
Entrepreneurs always feel like they're behind. That's normal. But, just know I know the numbers. You've built an incredible business.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
So I'll give you a bit of history. So, we AffinityClick was actually going to be in the ad tech space.
Okay.
And we kind of pivoted when we almost ran out of money. And we kind of invested about $800,000 or $900,000.
Did you raise capital for that, or
private investors, friends and family, myself. And, the funny story is I brought my CTO from Germany, and, we were we launched a V1 of AffinityClick, which is basically a blogging platform that would enable you to basically insert ads. When you let's say you write a blog post about your SLR camera.
Yeah.
We actually built this technology that would find the word SLR and overlay, those double underline links.
Yeah.
You'd hover over, you see a carousel ad.
Yeah.
So we built that like 8 or 9 years ago.
Oh, now it makes sense. AffinityClick.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we just basically said, look,
were you a blogging platform, or you just enabled the script to do the monetization?
It was more of a, call it personalization using shopping feeds.
Yep.
And that business has turned out to be a very big, not us, but that market.
I know a woman out of the UK. She built, I forget what it was called, but there's a few people that built, I think there was 2 big ones.
Like one big one is Criteo.
Yeah.
But, long story short, the amount of dollars needed to basically build such an infrastructure, basically was going to be very, very challenging. And at the time, VoIP was being, broken down in more simplistic form. So Twilio,
Well, what's the virtual PBX? I actually coded on it back in the day. I think Twilio was built on it.
Yeah, it's.
I'm mad at myself for not knowing that.
It's I know
it's the open source. Everybody uses it.
Yeah, we literally just talked about this last week.
Anyways, if it comes to me, I'll mention it. But it's cool because that was that allowed programmers to build voice apps.
Yeah, so Twilio basically launched this platform, and I came into the office one day and said, this ad tech thing is going to be a bit of a challenge. And I was looking at kind of doing a bit of research and saying, hey, there looks like there's an opportunity with Twilio where we may be able to launch something fairly quickly and not know anything about the kind of plain old telephone switch, so the traditional kind of switch layer. And, we basically looked at Twilio, looked at a few different players, but Twilio was kind of had the most breadth at the time.
Yeah.
And this was like 7 or 8 years ago. Right,
I think,
right
2009 they launched.
Yeah, and we basically launched an Android version of our product. And there was one other company in the space, and they had an iPhone.
Was that called Hushed then?
That was, we launched Android Hushed.
Yeah.
And then
was it built on top of Twilio then or not?
At the time, parts of it were built on the Twilio client, as well as we were doing termination, which means the actual call routing was done through Twilio. And about 3 months later, we then launched the iPhone version. So in 6 months, we actually launched this OTT solution. And to be honest, we were probably one of the first ones. There were a few people that tried it. We got tech crunched, if you will, when we launched Android. And we essentially started building the business. Asterix, yes.
I couldn't let it go. Sorry, asterisk.org if you guys want to check it out. It's pretty cool. Or just use Twilio today.
Well, and so Asterix open source platform, I think Twilio definitely built on that. And, their underlying core is probably still some Asterix component. And we looked at Asterix later on as, if we wanted to build this on our own. Yeah. And own more of the platform. And
so you guys were one of the first Android apps to do the OTT?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
In what I call disposable numbers, short-term numbers. Yeah. There might have been a few solutions at the time.
What was the use case for that? Like what kind of companies or people are using that?
Online dating, classifieds, personal.
Like Craigslist or Kijiji, I don't want to put my cell number. Oh, I guess they would take care of the form submit, but like so interesting. You would just route. You put a number, it would go through the phone, through the app.
So the way, what you do is when you download the app, you create an account, and you'll be able to choose. You'll get a free number by default, so you'll be able to choose a number in the U.S. or Canada, and you'll get it for 3 days, and that will give you full
3 days.
Well, it'll give you full.
That's the freemium free trial,
right? Yeah. It gives you the full kind of voice SMS capability. And then if you really like it, you'll convert into a paying customer. Now, you may convert, into a 7-day customer, which is basically $2. So if you think about it, we're giving you a phone number that you can use for 7 days, and then you can discard it. And then we ran that business probably for 3 or 4 years, and then subscriptions kind of came. I mean, if you think about it. When we launched this product, the App Store was in its infancy, right? It's the App Store is not that old, right? And we've been a top grossing app in the App Store.
And Apple would probably be 2012 or 11?
Yeah, let's say it's about 10 years old.
Yeah.
Right? It was only a couple years old. There was about 1 million applications in there.
Oh, you're right. The iPhone came out in probably 2007. Yeah, and then it was a couple years later, which would be more like now. Yeah.
So when we launched, when we launched the product, we quickly became a top grossing app in our category. So utilities, we're number one. We're number one in the U.S., Canada, and multiple markets for
Android and iPhone.
Android and iPhone. Android a little bit lagging behind, but like number 1, 2, 3 position for years.
Nice work, man.
And then Apple kind of changed their algorithms where there was a time where you could look at the top grossing apps in the store. It's gone. They removed that because it was basically, I don't want to say giving an unfair advantage, but you're at the top.
Keep doing it. You're going to keep being the top.
Yeah, exactly. So we are now in the App Store averaging top 10.
Yeah.
Right now the App Store is 15 times bigger. So,
still, man, that's huge.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of the revenue we were making 8 years ago versus today, I mean, it's orders of magnitude. Yeah. And our rank is down slightly, but there's a couple, so that's interesting, And as we've evolved this platform,
do you still have the CTO that you brought over from Germany?
Yeah.
Cool.
He's
still co-founder, I guess?
Yeah, he's the co-founder, and he's a permanent resident now in Canada. Yeah. Although doing Canadian immigration was a bit of a challenge.
It always is.
But it was worth it, and their family's here, so they love it.
That's cool.
He's actually half German, half Finnish, so he kind of really enjoys the cold weather.
Yeah, he's used to it.
Yeah, exactly. So, over the years, we've been kind of building the platform, and we got to a point where we became big enough that we could go directly to the carriers. Mm-hmm. So we would go to carriers now, and we can we'll basically rent these phone numbers at fractions of the cost that we did when we started, right?
Before you had to pay whoever's broker.
Well, yeah, so Twilio.
Oh, you buy them right from Twilio.
Twilio was always selling them.
Yeah.
And they would, I think their rack rate's like at $1. Yeah. But as you get mass, you get more volume. And I think, if I remember, we were top 15 customer with Twilio. Like we were a big customer.
Whoa,
for them.
That's cool.
Yeah. When they launched. Now they're
actually brought my, I have a high-end group for 10 million plus ARR SaaS companies. We went, Jeff's an old friend of mine, and we went, so I met Jeff 2008. Yep. And it was like, because I knew about Asterix, I worked on it. I was like, oh, that's a really cool idea to see him build, I think, $10 billion market cap.
Yeah, unbelievable.
In 10 years.
It's unbelievable. And I always kick myself for not getting some pre-IPO stock. I should have leveraged.
Especially if you were such a big customer.
I should have leveraged my invoices.
And, be like, hey, let's... some pre-IPO.
So in terms of the technology, great company, really strong vision. They're now moving into kind of the enterprise. They've got
call center. I think he showed us his new call cloud.
Yeah, they're now going into they're going to big Fortune 500 companies, and they're
with full solutions, not just
a solution that's fully customizable very quickly. I think Shopify has actually built.
No doubt. I mean, people forget I think one of the main growth drivers was the app economy, and then Uber notifications, Airbnb, all these apps needed, SMS or phone capabilities, and that's Twilio. I mean, yeah. So a lot of startups owe some hard plumbing.
Yeah, and so we have done a pretty good job building that business and acquiring customers. We've never had a month that was less revenue than previous month ever.
Every month is a record.
Every month we've started, and it's a very linear business. Yeah. It's a very slow growth. How
do you negotiate with the telcos? That sounds like a lot of.
Yeah, so the challenge with the telcos, so a couple things we want. So good question. The only leverage you really have is your rates, your volume, right? Yeah. How much volume you can.
You got to wait till you have enough volume.
Yeah, and so one of the things that we did. So if you think about our business, the way it works is you go to a Twilio, or you go to a Bandwidth, or you go to one of these companies, and they basically allow you to rent phone numbers from them. Okay. In the case of Twilio, they'll also have a Twilio client, which that client is basically PJ SIP. It's a VoIP client that enables the communication from their cloud-based technology to the outside world.
Yeah.
So you integrate the client.
It's like a VPN type of tunneling or something like that?
I mean, their client probably connects vis-a-vis the VPN.
But
to
that's
their
how
network.
it has to work. And you said PG.
Like if you want to use VoIP with Twilio, you got to use their client.
Yeah, as a
they're
back end.
opening that up in the future.
We built Clarity on top of. I didn't code it because I'm a horrible programmer. It turns out. But that's it. They had their client that was the API level that connected.
Yeah, and you probably built the Clarity client.
100%. Yeah. My developers did anyways.
Yeah, and great product, and we didn't really know anything about. I mean, by fluke, I have an electrical engineering degree with a minor in telecom. So I worked at Nortel, and I kind of designed. I was part of the team that designed the Sonnet networks, the optical networks for. A bunch of companies that are all, you wouldn't remember, but they all went bankrupt by now.
Yeah.
So I had this telecom background. I always had this affinity for, VoIP and telecom and communication. So that was kind of an interesting, I kind of lost my train of thought there.
With the telcos, how do you negotiate with telcos?
Oh, so as part of, you rent your numbers, and then when you want to make a phone call, you actually have to decide where you're going to route it. It's actually complex. Like all these roaming agreements. Are they all
running on top of each other?
Well, if you think of, let's say, Bell. Like you're a Bell customer.
Yep.
You have a Bell cell phone. You call someone in Amsterdam, as an example. Well, they have rates that they've negotiated with the carrier in Amsterdam. Right.
And Bell has a rate that they negotiate with the carrier that's different than Rogers would have with that carrier.
Right.
Okay.
And they would have a rate negotiated with you, as an example.
Based on my plan.
Right.
Yeah.
So you would then make your call to Amsterdam, and it would go to the switch. And when it gets to the switch in Amsterdam, the billing starts for that call for Bell, and Bell will charge that carrier will charge Bell. Bell will charge you.
Me. Yep.
And they have these roaming agreements around the world. In the case of VoIP, it's very similar.
It's the termination. Is that why
it's called termination? Yeah. Right. And in the case of Clarity, when you're setting up calls, and maybe you would there's a phone cost, right?
Yeah.
So we quickly, that became very cost prohibitive for us.
Because you're doing free.
Well, we were doing some free, but our volumes were really high, and so we had some leverage.
Yeah.
And so about 4 years ago, we built an LCR, which is a least cost routing table.
Okay.
And essentially, what that means is we can then go and get
You built that for
VoIP
yourself.
termination. Yeah, we built it.
You negotiated those, and
well, we built this, call it routing table, and then we basically got all these different wholesalers that have termination rates. Okay. We ingest them into our system, and then when you make a call, and you let's say you buy an international number with us, or you want to make an international call, we will decide which carrier is the cheapest, so we minimize the cost. Right?
Is the terminate? We're getting nerdy, but who cares? I love this. Is there an underlying protocol that's not connected to the phone number? How does it do that termination regardless of the number? Like if the carrier doesn't own the number, then is there a different endpoint?
Yeah, it's using SIP.
And SIP is like an IP concept, or?
SIP is how you're going to communicate with, let's say, that third party.
So that wholesaler has a SIP.
He has a SIP infrastructure.
Got it.
And you're basically going to SIP in and SIP out.
And everybody agrees that this is how we do it, regardless of where the number comes from.
Yeah, and
the number is like the domain.
The number is, the number's like, say, owned by Twilio or Bandwidth or whoever.
You rent it.
You rent it from them, and then if you want to do term or termination, you can then SIP out. Using SIP, you will then essentially SIP out to the infrastructure.
Got it. But
you'll pay Twilio a SIP out fee.
Yeah.
And you'll pay, there's fees, like there's nothing's for free.
Yeah.
Because now you're reducing your cost rate by going outside of, let's say, the Twilio cloud.
Got it.
Right.
Interesting.
So it's, and
so you renegotiate. I mean, is there a big cost saving?
I mean, we're, our VoIP. Our VoIP costs are in the millions.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's at a point where...
But when you do it yourself versus using Twilio, are we talking 30% cheaper, half?
I mean, I think it will really depend on the volume.
And the situation.
Situation. In fact, we use Twilio for a certain part of our product still.
Makes sense, yeah.
We actually use their client. It's quite good.
Yeah.
It's very strong. We're happy to use it.
Yeah.
And we use some, we sometimes get numbers from them, but we also have now infrastructure. Like we work directly with a carrier in the UK.
Yeah.
I talk to the CEO directly, and he allocates numbers in the UK, so we can now offer, unlimited UK mobile numbers.
I just find it fascinating because, like, I was listening to Rework podcast 37 Signals, and they were talking about their infrastructure costs. And I think that's happening more and more today, where founders are, paying for the Amazon Web Services or whatever, and it's like they don't ever think of like just looking at it. I think in 37 Signals case, they talked about like it was like a $2 million a year, maybe $6 million. It was millions, and they like saved 20%.
Yeah.
By like just analyzing it and restructuring different parts of their code and all this stuff. And I just find that fascinating that that's free money.
Yeah, like if I give you a hard number, it's probably between 25 and 30%.
Real money
that we would
you
save.
Can just get back, hits the bottom line.
And in our case, we're growing, so we get the savings, but our bill kind of stays the same because it's growing every month.
That's cool.
So they're happy, right? And fast forward, we built this product. We've got a ton of users on the platform. I mean, I think we're close to about 400,000 monthly active users, of which 65% of them are paying customers.
Yeah.
In our business, you can log out, log back into the application. You can delete it, come back in. So we have lots of customers that basically have it, install it, reinstall it whenever they need it.
Yeah.
So that's cool. When we, in terms of, we should talk about pay-per-click a little bit about Apple and Google and how that works in our world. So, Google's done a very good job. They've moved away from mobile products. You can no longer do keyword buys. You can only do it on desktop.
Really? They don't allow you to do it in the App Store for mobile searches?
You can't select keywords anymore unless you're driving traffic to a desktop page. What they have is something called universal ad campaigns.
Okay.
And essentially, you give them a budget and you upload some creative, and then their, big data algorithms optimize the spend. And, they will go out and try to find customers. Now, what's interesting about Google is...
Do you give them like a conversion pixel to go pattern match against? Like, how do they know what a good customer looks like?
We don't trust any of the advertisers.
Yeah.
So we use a third-party attribution tool.
Yeah.
Which basically we use Adjust.
Yeah.
And Adjust lets us, they've got a very good technology that uses some kind of machine learning that essentially determines.
There's a lot of fraud, man, in clicks.
There's a lot of fraud, for sure. And I think in the case of, I would say probably less so when it relates to App Store, like apps.
Yeah, definitely
but probably
on display.
In display, I would say
my buddy Matt said that it could be like 20 to 30%.
Yeah.
And Google doesn't give a crap because they're just passing that along to you like bots. Just
like it is definitely a bit of a problem, and with universal ad campaigns, you're picking keywords. Actually, sorry, you're not picking keywords.
You're just
creative budget.
Find me some customers. Heat seeker.
Yeah, and the way we look at our business is we look at kind of ROAS, right? Return on ad spend. We don't,
as you should. If people don't use ROAS, I don't understand how you guys are running marketing campaigns.
Yeah, so we look at, so this attribution platform has enabled us to pull, we look cohort by cohort.
Yeah.
We look at ROAS, and if we can get to 30% in like the first week, meaning for every dollar we spend, we get 30 cents back.
That's fair.
We're going to break even on that cohort within 5 months.
Yeah.
And it's been,
So how the LTV playouts over time, so you look at that 30% in the first week.
Yeah, except the challenge, as I mentioned to you, you have lots of customers who delete the app.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to kind of resync those users. Yeah. So we actually think what we're reporting is lower than probably what it is. So we break even, let's say, in 6 months on our spend, but it's probably even less. Right, because we can't track those people who uninstall.
See, this is where like people, I think it was Uber got in trouble, with using the device identifier, to try to be sneaky about this.
Yeah,
like it's essentially identifying who the person is, even if they reinstall the app. I think there was like a way to, not that you guys do this, but I know some people like I think a lot of the analytics companies are like, okay, well, if it's this Wi-Fi connection and this, UUID of the device, then we can assume it's the same person because we've seen this person before, kind of thing. It's interesting.
I think
It's against terms of service, I think.
Yeah, I don't know how Adjust does it.
Yeah.
But they've been around. Like, there's a couple big ones. Like, I think it's AppsFlyer and
Yeah.
Adjust.
Yeah.
And they have their kind of secret sauce, and we think it's generally accurate to like 80%.
Perfect.
But it's good enough.
So then you use that to make sure that your campaigns are.
So with Google, you literally say, I want to spend $1,000 a day.
Yeah.
And you just go.
And then you need to watch it over time to see if that 1,000 from 3 weeks ago produced the kind of
yield. And Google only deprecated search for mobile. I think a year ago.
Okay.
So this is fairly new.
Yeah.
And their algorithms are getting better. So we're seeing a more improved ROAS, every single.
letting the algorithms do their job.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And they have a lot of data. So remember, they also have all the apps, so they can determine.
They know. What do you look like
They can
that's
actually
similar?
determine, like, if somebody downloads a competitor application and purchases something, they know who that person is. They can retarget to that person.
They can say, okay, this person also did these searches.
I get a lot of, like, on my, I'm currently running a Pixel 4, so I moved away from Apple. Just because they haven't evolved their platform, a bunch of reasons. But Google's, in my opinion, is a far superior platform right now.
Hardware or software?
Software.
Okay, wow.
Yeah, in my opinion.
Okay, that's good.
But so I've been using our app in the App Store, and I see lots of other competing applications that I've never downloaded, but they know.
Yeah.
So it. That's cool.
How critical was it to get your paid acquisition right for you to scale?
We did it later on.
But I mean, because I think you guys you were first, you had good reviews, you're ranking well in the App Store, so it was less important at first, but then...
Yeah, we didn't actually do any ad buys until Apple forced us to do ad buys.
Talk about that.
And the way they forced us to do ad buys is they opened up their ad platform. And so we had no choice to start running ads, and we would.
Is that why they delisted that the gross revenue leaderboard? Do you think?
I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, they offered.
When you say force, why was it forced?
Well, not forced. I mean, that's a strong word.
But
I think
if other people are using it, and
basically, imagine you're in this ecosystem. It's very closed.
Yeah.
You are ranking well, and then all of a sudden, your competitors can now buy keywords.
Yeah, got it.
Now, back at the time.
Including
we
your
were
own
able to
search
enforce
term?
our own trademarks.
Okay.
Not anymore.
So they'll let their competitor run ads against your name.
Yeah. So like
crazy.
Back in the day when you would post your upload your app to the App Store, you could select a bunch of keywords, and those keywords would rank. So if I typed in a specific keyword, and our competitors would type in hushed, so I would just go to the App Store, type in hushed, and I'd see all the competing apps, and then I would file a complaint, and Apple would turn these guys off. They would force them to remove the trademark.
Yeah.
Because it's our brand.
Yeah.
And that was awesome, right? Where they were enforcing that. And now once they've opened the App Store, they've said no. You can't. Of course, you can't have the word hushed in your creative, but you can now buy keywords against it. So we have to now spend, I don't know, thousands of dollars a month protecting our brand, right? So we're buying keywords, just hushed branded keywords in the App Store.
Does Apple or does Google let you fight against people using
Google? You can't buy keywords.
Okay.
So,
Don't let you do keywords even for desktop?
For desktop, you can.
Okay. But can somebody? But yeah, people compete. People run ads against competitor names all the time.
Yeah, I mean, for sure.
High intent.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay,
I think
you can't protect against that.
It is kind of like this.
Who wants to pay more?
Well, we're all bidding against ourselves,
Yeah.
right? Especially if you build a brand. So Hushed is now a known brand.
Yeah.
People Google it. If you type in, we have a really good SEO strategy. So
Yeah.
if you Google like hide my number,
Yeah.
you'll find that we're probably ranked in the top.
When did that priority come into play for you?
For SEO or SEO?
Was it before paid?
No, SEO came in more aggressively probably 2 years ago.
Okay, so once you realize it's like we're spending a lot of money for these keywords or these kind of terms-ish maybe if we invest the time on SEO, then we can.
Yeah, and
It's
we're
a transitional kind of.
Yeah, and SEO has been it's been amazing for us.
Yeah.
And Google really loves us that way.
Yeah.
And a part of that is lots of backlinks, been around for a long time.
Yeah, you've got domain.
We've got there's some credibility there.
Yeah.
And they for sure will start looking at rankings and all that other stuff. In their algorithms. So fast forward, we start advertising, and it's not a huge. It's a decent size spend, but our we've been fortunate that we built this good brand. But what we're doing that's working really well is we're working with partners. So partners where we offer like a lifetime number. So if you go to Groupon, you can buy a hushed number, and it's a lifetime number, and essentially you'll get this number will never expire as long as you use it once every 6 months. And
you're saying partner as in Groupon sells it for you, or
yeah,
they
like
use
it's
it internally, or how does when you say partner, somebody else is selling these numbers for you?
Yeah, like we built a system where if you wanted to offer, if Groupon is actually reselling our numbers on their store.
Okay.
Right.
So behind the scenes for their merchants that want to do a Groupon that need a number,
exactly.
They may not want to use their primary number. Or they
just
want to
think of
use
it
a
as
voice.
like we have the brand, people will type in hushed coupon, and they may find Groupon.
Got it.
Right.
Yeah.
And they can redeem, and then obviously they have their own infrastructure and way of advertising that promotion because they make money.
Okay, so it's just normal Groupon, but it's for your product.
Yeah.
What other partners would you like? How does the partner strategy work in your?
So we're trying to go after kind of tech-related blogs, and essentially we have different creative, but the one that seems to be working well is this concept of a lifetime number.
Yeah.
And that lifetime number, you can get usage, you can keep it as long as you use it.
So when you say a partner, they become like an affiliate for you?
Affiliate, yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah.
We've got some good relationships, and ZDNet and some big publishers.
ZDNet, man, that's awesome.
Yeah, they're still around.
Yeah.
So there's a whole strategy, and we want to build out that even further.
Yeah.
So where we are right now as a business is we've built this very strong consumer product.
Yeah.
We have lots of kind of consumers on it, but we also have small business. So we're in kind of end of Q1, we'll be launching kind of an IVR capable solution in the product, which enables us,
IVR is a voice.
It's interactive voice response,
Yeah.
which is a really bad. We're trying to not use those words.
Yeah, because
in fact,
makes
I
sense.
should
Well, that's
recalibrate and say we're building a system that will allow for people who wish to set up teams and invite other users to Hushed in their organization.
Yeah.
Where they can essentially manage like a single billing.
Yeah.
Manage their number, do call forwarding.
Normal like phone needs of a small business.
Exactly.
Yeah. Everybody could bring their own device. They install your app, but then all of a sudden there's like extensions that one primary number they call, and then you can route it to your different.
Yeah, and we're rolling in those capabilities, and then we'll be launching a new brand that will be solely focused
for the business, the SMB space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's if you look at the size of our category, I don't know what the number is in the U.S. Let's say it's a couple $100 million in terms of privacy. Now I think that is on the come. Like it seems to be growing significantly.
Yeah.
But if you look at, we call it the SMB kind of virtual phone.
Well, this is the grasshopper space.
Exactly. And they do
Ring
such
Central.
Those guys do such a horrible job at, they're not coming from a mobile side of things. A lot of those guys traditionally built a website.
Yeah.
And we're actually launching, a mobile first product, right? So if you want to set up your organization from your cell phone, you can do that fairly quickly.
Wow. You install the app and you can get it all done from your mobile?
Yeah.
No desktop.
Website. And there will be, we'll have a desktop client where you can at least send and receive text messages and make phone calls. But for the most part, we're really taking kind of a mobile first approach because I think that's obviously the future. And, as it
100%.
relates, and we'll be able to kind of lower those traditional VoIP costs by probably 50%.
What, when you look at the history of the business, what are some of those moments of, company killing that almost like took you out? What are some of the hardest times, Justin, when you look at that? You're obviously
the hardest
share.
Yeah, the hardest time for the company was at the beginning, where we basically, were in
Had
it.
to pivot.
We had to pivot, and we didn't just I don't even know if the term pivot is the right term. We had to basically restart. And that
After
was
spending $900K.
Yeah, after spending most of our money.
Yeah.
And, basically I remember saying to my CTO, I said, look, if we don't actually figure out a product where we can make money, I can't even afford to send you back to Germany. Like, you know what I mean? So it was like, it was,
You may get arrested.
it was a really trying time, and it was actually probably pretty unhealthy too, because it was fun, but it was stressful and fairly unhealthy.
How'd you get through that?
We basically
hunkered down.
right? We basically had to hunker down. We came up with this idea, and we launched. Now, we kind of joke about this today. If I wanted to launch another version of our product, my CTO launched this essentially with one other developer in 3 months.
Wow.
If I put him in a room today and say, do this, there's no way he could have done it. So, at the time we launched, it was an okay product, but I remember for probably 2 years straight after launching the iOS version, we basically just pushed release after release after release.
Trying to fix stuff?
Fix stuff, improve stuff. Like every month, if you go to like App Annie and look at releases, you'll see that the first 3 years there were like release.
Wow.
And now we do, probably one major release a year.
Yeah.
And we kind of talk about it in the office, and it's like, how do we kind of accelerate the velocity of, how quickly we can ship product? And, we are even now going through a multi-month, almost a year refactor of all this code that we did, 6-7 years
Paying
ago.
down some code debt.
So this year we've been paying down the code debt and basically getting the platform ready for kind of the next iteration. And so that was a very hard time in our lives, for sure. And, luckily what was interesting about this business is when we launched it, we were making money the first day.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is cool. We made a couple $1,000.
Cool. Yeah. Making money.
And then every day was kind of going up a little bit. And every month we basically just beat the previous month. Right. Yeah. And we had first mover advantage. There's no we were lucky because we were one of the first guys out there. Yeah. We were in the hands. We just kept on building and iterating off of that platform over the last years. Now we're at a stage where like, okay, refactoring and reoptimize all the spend. So we've spent the last year and a half looking at our costs.
Exactly. Yeah.
And and we didn't care about that at the time. We were looking at
growth,
market share.
Yeah.
Now we're looking at the cost. We've gone through this whole refactoring aspect, which is good. Because now this platform is really, in a position where I think we're going to be able to ship a lot more product. So we'll probably go from, one major release to maybe two, maybe even possibly three releases a year. And we are kind of moving into some new areas for that product. Can't really get into detail, but one of the areas that we're moving into is an area that I think when you see it, you'll be like, oh, this makes a lot of sense. And it's a new up and coming area in the kind of cell phone data space that I think will be very interesting for Hushed. And we will be looking to launch, a SMB product as well. Can't really get into the specifics and timing, but we've been working on it. And part of this refactoring is we're going to use this platform that we built. Yeah. And we're still using Twilio. They've been a great partner. Yeah. And they've been very good to us. And but we've now learned a lot, right? We've got multiple carriers. We've got our routing tables.
Was this your first? Is AffinityClick the first business? Like when because I know you worked at Nortel and What was this the first business?
No, I graduated from Nortel. I worked there all through high school and university. I worked at Nortel in kind of the physics department, and it was kind of crazy times. And then when I graduated from engineering, I worked there for about a year and a half. Yeah. And then I quit to start a company. And that company basically was a company called SiteBrand. And you may or may not have ever heard of it, but I grew that probably to about 45 people. We took it public in 2008.
Wow.
In 2007, somewhere in that range.
Yeah.
And we took it public because we couldn't actually...
Like in Toronto Stock Exchange?
Yeah, on the TSX. Yeah. We took it public, in hindsight it was a mistake, but we couldn't get access to capital.
Yeah,
and
it's Canada.
It was a very tough market. And that platform was a web personalization platform. Mm-hmm. So we had companies like Roots. We had companies like, I can't even remember the names, but we had some.
So what would it do? It just allowed you to save shopping cart?
No. So Roots, you'd install this kind of JavaScript on their website. This is before mobile. And we would identify, hey, this person's from the US, so we're going to swap out content and target that website for U.S. visitors only.
Got it.
So we can A/B test, and you can figure out what the lift is when you're presenting. So it's a personalization platform that was built in 2000.
Yeah.
And frankly, if you look at our competitors, were Omniture, Website Story. I mean, I don't know if you remember these companies.
Yeah.
And they were big organizations, and it was a good business. We ended up, because it was public, we ended up selling the asset to a local company, and then we sold the public shell because we essentially, the business didn't make sense anymore.
Yeah.
Back in 2008, it was very interesting times. Our customer was the marketer.
Yeah.
And we would call our customers, and they wouldn't even be there.
No.
They would be like,
marketing
I lost my job.
Yeah.
I don't know who's going to pay this bill.
Yeah.
So, we kind of ran it for a couple more years. I was not, I kind of left at that time, and
you got experience in dealing with chaos.
For sure. So I've, by the time I was like 28, I had taken this thing public, probably raised like $10 million.
That's cool.
And I said, okay, I don't want to do any of that stuff.
Yeah.
In this next business, I'm not doing any of it.
Because you guys have been revenue generating, have you raised capital so far?
No.
Okay, so you still control, don't have to deal. Do you have a board?
We've got a few people on the board.
Okay, but not like
it's not
formal.
We don't
process.
have it's not like running a public company. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And so for me, that enables us to just focus on building the business.
Yeah.
Right. That's what I want to do. And I find that when you're a small startup and you take venture capital, you spend a lot of time dealing with the VCs and not enough time
board management, investment management.
And so it's good if you have the right people.
Yeah.
And we had great people, but it was like, they're only involved every quarter.
Yeah.
You're involved every day. And when you're at the infancy of trying to build this thing, and it's going sideways, it's tough to get input from people who aren't really running your business.
Yeah. Justin, when you look at last decade of entrepreneurship for you, anything on a personal level, like from a character point of view, who have you had to become to continue leading the company today and going forward?
I think when I had started, I had people working for me that were twice my age. And I think I probably was a bit more cocky, edgy. And I think, as I have grown, one of the things that I had to change was, essentially, empathy, like understanding your people, right? And these are the core assets of your business, is the people that work for you.
Why was that important?
Well, I think it's important because if you want people to kind of believe in the dream, you have to respect their ideas. Like, I'm human like the rest of them. I can't always be right. In fact, I would prefer not to make the decision. I'd like to make the decision as a group. These are things that I kind of employed over the years because I think it's very challenging. Sometimes if I have to make the final decision, I'll make it. But I'd like to try to include more people.
Scales.
It scales, yeah. I mean,
it's less work. It's funny. In the early days, we don't mind working the 16-hour days and being the person that calls the shots. And at scale, it's like, oh, that's a lot of work. It's tiring.
Super tiring. And, when you go home, you still think about it, right? And the idea is if you can get more of your people to think about it, you can take less of that risk, that risk off the table because you've got more people worried about the same issues. So in keeping them, and so the other thing is we're very transparent with our, we do monthly meetings and we're very transparent on the business. Mm-hmm. So everybody knows what's up.
Yeah.
Whereas probably in my previous business,
Well, kept things close to the chest.
Yeah, we just keep things close, and you know, for what reason, I don't know. So having a bit more, being more public with the team and understand, hey, this is what we're doing.
What have you learned? What's the benefit of doing that?
You earn the trust of your team. I think that's critical. You know, people believe, you know, if you're more open with the business, I think people will respect you more, and I think they're going to believe in what it is you're trying to do. Whereas if you don't, you know, you just have people that come to work but not really have a purpose.
They're not
connected.
They're not bought in.
Yeah. I mean, I think that was a pretty good learning experience for me. The other thing is, you know, the distraction. Like I don't spend any time, you know, we get lots of calls and people interested in maybe looking at, call it M&A opportunities or partnerships. And, you know, from my perspective, we're just building the business, and I don't want to waste a lot of time having those conversations. And I think in my previous life, if someone called me,
You would have took it.
I would have took it because
Tell me how pretty you think I am.
Yeah, exactly. Now I don't necessarily care.
Yeah.
And, you know, because I know that if we build a great product that's world class, you know,
Opportunities will come.
Opportunities will come, and they'll be the right opportunities. And, you know, we're
Less
not
distractions.
Yeah, and we don't have a burning, you know, fuse at the other end where we've got to like, oh my God, make a decision. There's no decision to make other than, okay, what's the next release going to look like and why? So I think that's been a very, you know, good experience. I mean, I've been blessed because, you know, I think as an entrepreneur, you know, when you launch your business, my only advice would be you need to keep your head down, and you need to just believe in what it is you're doing, okay, even if others don't. But at some point, you have to decide that critical point, is this actually going to work? Because the time you waste trying to convince yourself that this business is going to work is time that you're losing against another opportunity, right? And so for me, when we did that pivot years ago, we did it because we had no choice, but it was a very tough decision because we invested so much money on this platform. In fact, we kind of joke about it where we're thinking, hey, we should like bring that platform back. Like, we still have all the GitHub, you know, repositories and whatnot. So I think it's important that, you know, as an entrepreneur, you really believe in what it is that you're trying to do, but also, you know, understand that it's okay to change. And in our case, we iterated our platform like all the time. Like there was never a time where we didn't like, okay, how do we improve this? How do we improve this? We didn't stop.
Yeah.
And it actually, you know, we've reduced those releases now, which for me is frustrating because I know that there's so many other new things I want to do. Yeah. But you know, we're a bigger company now, right? We got more people, bigger development. You know, we have scaling issues now. Yeah. Now my big challenge is, how do I actually scale my team so that they're as productive when we were, you know, 15 people going to say 50 people, right? And so I'm learning, you know, those challenges.
That's super cool.
Yeah,
Justin, I know this is one of the first few interviews that you've done, and I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you coming on here, sharing your story such openly, and being a great example of just, you know, putting your heads down and building a real revenue. Like most of the people listen are bootstrappers focused on revenue, and it's, you know, everybody knows about the Shopifys and et cetera, but it's not often we get to talk with an entrepreneur like yourself. So thanks for coming on.
I appreciate for having me.
Awesome. Appreciate you.
Thanks for watching this episode of Escape Velocity. Be sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment with your biggest insight from our conversation. Be sure to check out the next episode.